big breaking of this morning. It's a big relief for borrowers as the government has told the Supreme Court that it is ready to waive interest on interest for loans up to 2 crore rupees during the moratorium period. In fact, ET now broke the story last week on the 29th of September. Ruchi Bhatia, who broke that story, joins us now. Ruchi, it's huge. First up, if you could break down this affidavit given by the government and who this waiver will be applicable to. Which kind of loans will the waiver be applicable to?
Mubina, it's a big relief coming in for borrowers, especially for people who had taken loans for small and medium enterprises, individual loans, credit card loans, as well as auto loans up to 2 crores. This is exactly what ET now had reported, that the government was inclined towards a waiver of compound interest, and that's exactly what the government has done. And they have not put the burden of it on banks as well. They are likely to take the burden of it themselves. This is what ET now had reported last week, and this is the submission that the government has made in their affidavit in the apex court that was submitted late last night. We at ET now are given to understand that the government in their affidavit have written that the interest on interest for loans up to 2 crores during the moratorium period will be waived off. The government is going to bear the burden resulting from the waiver of compound interest, and they've also said that the government realizes that it would be impossible for banks to bear the burden from resulting in waiver of compound interest without passing the financial burden of it on the depositors, and which is why the government has decided to step in. However, this relief will be provided only to certain very vulnerable sectors. The government has said that the waiver of compound interest will be limited to only the vulnerable categories of borrowers. This is exactly what was recommended to them by the Mehrishi panel, the former CAG-led panel that was looking into the financial impact of the issue of waiver of interest and the issue of waiver of compound interest as well. We're given to understand the interest waiver is going to apply for loans taken by small and medium enterprises, individual loans for housing, education, credit cards and auto loans as well. In fact, we're given to understand that the government has said that the loans over 2 crores will not be applicable for a waiver of compound interest, and now this relief will be provided to all categories of borrowers, whether they had taken the loan moratorium, whether they had opted for the loan waiver or not. Having said that, the government in their affidavit have also maintained why they did not opt for a waiver of interest, because they say that the banking system would have lost as much as 6 lakh crore rupees if all the loans and advances were waived off, and the government has decided against it because this would have led to a tough fiscal position for the government, given the fact that they're spending all the money towards pandemic management right now. As I said, this case will now be up for hearing on the 5th of October, that is Monday. But before that, this is the holistic decision that has been provided by the government.
What about the impact on, the government and on banks? And I understand that, since the government has said that they are going to bear the burden, again, there will be all sorts of questions as to what's going to be the bill, that the banks may rake up for the government to cough up.
Oh, absolutely. This is a very interesting question, because given the fact that the government has said that if they would have opted for a waiver of interest, it would have cost the banking system close to 6 lakh crore rupees. The government has refrained by, in the affidavit, refrained from talking about the bill in terms of waiver of compound interest. However, Mubina, it is important to note that various independent agencies were looking at a bill of close to 10 to 15,000 crore rupees if a waiver of compound interest would be given. However, the government has further limited it to only certain category of borrowers, especially for MSMEs, individual loans taken for housing, education, credit cards, auto loans. It needs to be seen what is going to be the real fiscal impact on the government's coffers. However, as I said, it's going to be very limited, something that the government deemed it fit even as they thought that some sort of a relief can be provided in. Having said that, let's also get in our guests on the show. Maithili Busnirmat, consulting editor, also joining in. Maithili, hi, good morning. This is Ruchi Bhatia. Let me first begin by asking you, Maithili, you've always said that the banks should not be there. So much judicial overreach should not be there in commercial decision making process, especially in the banking sector. Having said that, now the government has said that they will be bearing the burden. It will not be upon the banks. They won't have to bear the burden on providing any sort of a relief. Your first thoughts on the affidavit that has been submitted by the government in the Apex Court today?
Well, it's good that the government has finally come to a decision and has given a petition in the Supreme Court saying exactly what it will bear and to whom these concessions will be given. Hopefully, this will end the impasse in the Supreme Court and the matter will be rightly restored to the parties to where the decision-making should have been taken, either banks or government. And yes, the government is right in its petition when it says that it would not be correct at all to put the burden on banks and will destroy the very essence of commercial banking. And hence, the government has rightfully decided to bear the burden. But where I have a problem, Ruchi, a very serious problem, in fact, as I said, the positive is that this is a decision being taken by the right quarters. Hopefully, it will end the impasse. So those are reservations is in the kind of relief that you're given, the category that the government has decided. In the case of MSMEs, it's okay if you say up to 2 crores because MSMEs do create employment, they do add to the productivity and the GDP growth in the country. But where I have a serious issue is when you say housing loans about 2 crores. Now you're talking about affordable housing. Affordable housing is defined as 50 lakh in non-metros, 65 lakhs in metros. Now, a person who can take a housing loan of up to 2 crores is certainly not in the part of the category that the government decides has stated is the most vulnerable part of the country in this people in the country at a time when the per capita income per annum is 1,50,000 crores. We have roughly 25% of the population below poverty line, roughly 15,000 per annum. So at a time like this, to say that housing loans up to 2 crores, consumer durable loans up to 2 crores, personal loans to professionals up to 2 crores, consumer loans up to 2 crores, housing loans, education loans up to 2 crores, and education in the IIM costs about 25 lakhs. And education in the IIT costs about 15 lakhs. So I think these two, all except for the MSME category, in all other categories, the limit should be drastically lowered, not more than 50 lakhs, because they are by no means such borrowers can they by any means be classified as the most vulnerable in a country as poor as us. So that I have very serious reservations on, and I hope the government does amend its petition before the Supreme Court to this effect.
Right, interesting points there raised by Maithili. Maithili, do stay on with us. Mr. R.K. Bakshi as well as Mr. D.K. Mittal also joining in on this leg of the show. Mr. Bakshi, hi, good morning. Let me first come to you. This is Ruchi Bhatia. Your first thoughts on the affidavit that has been submitted in the Apex Court and the points that Maithili was raising about the fact that for MSMEs loans, a waiver of interest on interest for loans up to 2 crores makes sense. But for the other categories, the limit seems to be way too high. What do you make of the affidavit that has been submitted in the Apex Court, and how hopeful are you that this is going to resolve the impasse on the issue of waiver of interest?
So I fully agree with what Maithili has said. She is very correct. Number one, the government has sought a via media to remove this court case, which was going in an indeterminate direction. And had the court ruled that interest on interest cannot be charged in this case or because of exigency, then tomorrow again the same principle would have revived in all other cases. And this is fundamental to banking, that interest on interest once charged becomes part of the principal if not paid by due date. There is no difference between principal and interest. So to that extent, the government tried their best earlier to plead in the court. But since court seemed to be taking a particular direction, I think they have found a via media in appointing Maharishi committee and coming up with certain via media to see that judicial respect is also maintained and the banking principles are also not destroyed. I fully agree to Maithili's point that 2 crore for personal loans is a very, very large amount, and unnecessarily the government should not burden itself with paying interest on interest for such richer segments of the economy when they have got much better use for that money to help much lower stratas of the population in many other ways.
Let me also take it over with Mr. Mittal as well. Mr. Mittal, hi, good morning. This is Ruchi Bhatia. This is really a reversal of stance coming in the apex court. The government earlier was not in favor of either waiver of interest or waiver of interest on interest as well in the apex court. But in the affidavit that has now been submitted, given the fact that court was taking a certain direction and the government had to commit to some sort of a holistic decision in this matter, the government has decided to give relief only to very vulnerable sectors. That's what they've said in the apex court. How do you look at the resolution that the government is now looking at to break the impasse in the apex court?
So, Ruchi, I have two fundamental points which I think we need to understand. A, this is going to create a very bad culture for repayment to banks, which is extremely dangerous for the country. Now, this culture started when government started writing off agriculture loans. Now, if courts also start doing the same thing, I think who's going to run banks? Ultimately, banks do not own all the money deposited with them. It is public money. A section of society is going to subsidize the other section of society. Is that a fair thing? On what basis? So I have a very strong moral question that should that be happening. The second part is, and I am amazed how we can have so much overreach of courts in these matters. These are contractual matters done by contract law. Is there a sanctity of that law in this country? If not, then who is going to run the country? There is a contract between a borrower and a bank written in ink. If that is not to be followed, then how is it going to follow? And if we were to extend this kind of a situation, that because the pandemic you want to waive interest on interest or you want to waive interest, what happens when there are floods? What happens when there are droughts? What happens when there are tornadoes happening all over the coastal line? So how are we going to do that? So every situation we need to do that? No. The only solution is that borrower and bank sit together to come to a solution. So this is extreme overreach. I am so sad to say that this is extreme overreach.
Oh, absolutely.
This is, and the government should have been putting the foot down that if we do that, we are destroying the banking system. The court still wants to decide, let them destroy. Ultimately, they are the last depositor or repository of the constitution. If they think that they have to destroy it, so let it be.
Mr. Mittal, point well taken. Point well taken. There is judicial overreach. Maithili also has been talking about it for a very long time on the channel. Every time we, get her on this matter. Let me take that point across with Mr. Bakshi. Mr. Bakshi, as Mr. Mittal is pointing out, there was a lot of judicial overreach in this case, and Mr. Mittal is of the view that the government should have put their foot down. This is going to ruin the credit culture, and we cannot afford to let that happen. We've seen what happens in the case of, a waiver of agri loans that happens, and the kind of burden that it puts on the government's own finances. And now we're in the midst of a pandemic. The government should not have been okay with either a waiver of interest or waiver of interest on interest. What do you make of those comments coming in? And can that really be a path that the government can take at a time like this, when the apex court was pretty much siding on one side during the hearings?
Yeah, so in all my earlier appearances on the TV and in other discussions, I have clearly stated that this is not challengeable. In fact, to my mind, this suit did not even merit admission. And so much of time of the Supreme Court has gone on this. But the Supreme Court, even in the preliminary hearings and in the later hearings, they had almost indicated their mind that we are inclined to do this. So the government, I don't know. I agree with Mr. Mittal fully, but I don't know what are the compulsions of the government. The government has got multiple cases all the time in front of the judiciary. So a thing which can come as a social relief to the smaller borrowers, poorer borrowers, so to present the social face of the government as well as keep the respect of the government. So as I said earlier, they found a via media to keep the judicial honor and get a judgment which will not cut at the base or the principles of banking. Although I agree with Mr. Mittal, in some ways it does still affect that. But at least the bankers are not being asked to bear that. So fundamental principles of banking are not jeopardized. I don't know why the judiciary made their inclination and mind clear. I mean, they should make up their mind after all the arguments on both the sides have been put forth. Weigh them and then take a decision. Why is this inclination became so clear right in the beginning?
Ruchi, while it could be a face-saving exercise, for the government, Maithili, in terms of the impact on the banking sector, the government in their affidavit has said that if we would have waived off the interest, the banking sector would have been, would have seen a hit of close to 6 lakh crore rupees. But they've stopped short of making any, comment on the numbers with respect to waiver of compound interest. What's been your own estimate with the kind of relief that they're providing to certain sectors? What could be the real impact that the government in terms of their own finances will have to take?
Well, the government hasn't given any estimate in the affidavit, and the fact is that they've said that this will be available even to those who don't ask for the moratorium. Of course, it's been limited to certain segments, but if you see, the ceilings are very generous, so it will effectively cover almost all the borrowers in those segments. So the 15,000 crore number that we had earlier was only, for those who had asked for the moratorium. Now we extend it for those who don't ask for the moratorium also, and if the government is going to give you some freebies, why will anybody not take it? So even those who have not applied for the moratorium are likely to take it. So at a time when the government's resources are so terribly tested, and we have huge demands on the exchequer, I frankly cannot understand government setting us such a liberal, generous limit. That's, as I said, even upper middle class people cannot perhaps take a housing loan of 2 crores. Frankly, I cannot take a housing loan of 2 crores. So I do not understand the government setting these very generous limits. And I entirely agree with Mr. Mittal and Mr. Bakshi that the Supreme Court should never have gotten to this area at all. This is an area which lies squarely in the domain of the executive. If the government wishes to pick up the tab, that is a decision which the government can take. But the Supreme Court should never have gotten to this. And it sets up a very unfortunate precedence, because every commercial decision can go to the apex court, which has millions of other things before it. Unfortunately, people hesitate to criticize the Supreme Court because it has a very powerful weapon by way of contempt of court. So people hesitate to criticize the Supreme Court, but it should never have entertained it in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, on that note, Maithili, Mr. Mittal, as well as Mr. Bakshi, appreciate you all taking your time out and speaking with us on this Saturday morning. With that, it's back to you, Mubina, in the, at your home. We're not working from newsrooms these days.
Yeah. Thank you, Ruchi, for that. Well, that's the big story of this morning. Late last night, the government submitted the affidavit to the Supreme Court saying that it is willing to bear the interest on interest for loans under 2 crore rupees. This story, of course, was broken to you by Ruchi Bhatia just a couple of days ago.